Today we're going to go over a quick example of CloudVision Portal in a multi-node installation scenario. There are two different scenarios where this can be installed. It can be a standalone as a single node, which is best for labs, or it can be a cluster of three, which is considered multi-node and recommended for production deployments. There are two different supported installation methods. One is the ISO-based installation, and the other is the shell-based installation. There is also the RPM-based installation, which is actually a third. The shell-based installation example is what we're going to be going over today. And we're going to be performing that as a multi-node in an ESXi environment. There's a couple things about this. In order to do that, you have to download a packaged OVA file from arista.com. So let's check out and find out where we can find that. So you go to arista.com, software download, and you go down to where it says CloudVision Portal. And then you go to your active releases, and it looks as though 2020 has just been released. We're not going to be installing that one today. We're going to do an example of the grant release, which is 2019.1.4. So this is where you can find this. A couple other notes. You can also take a look at the release notes, which is always a good idea for any new version. You look at and have the documentation handy, which is the product documentation. And then you go to the CloudVision configuration guide, and the most recent version of the CloudVision configuration guide, as you can see, is 2019.1.0. So the lab environment that we're working with is ESXi version 6.5. So I will log into this. And in the meantime, we will talk about the recommended way in which we usually deploy this. What we like to see is diversity in the hypervisor environment. This is ESXi 6.5, and in a multi-node cluster you deploy 3 OVAs, preferably one on a set of 3 different actual ESXi hosts, as you can see here. And then once they're installed, that is the process that we're going through. Once they're installed, they actually have round trip delay requirements between them of 10 milliseconds or less. And then the requirement from CloudVision out to the network devices is pretty lenient at 500 milliseconds. And what we'll do is we'll go through and examine the settings on 2 VMs that I've already deployed. We're going to deploy the third one, but in the meantime, as you can see, I've switched over from this example over to our lab environment for resource purposes. I'm going to put all of the VMs on one. So all of the 3 VMs on one ESXi host. So here are the resources that one VM will need. This ends up being, it needs to use 16 cores, and this ends up being about 24 gig of memory. It will take up 2 virtual hard disks. One is where like the operating system resides, and then the other one is actually 1 terabyte freed up for telemetry data specifically. You'll see that there are 2 NICs. We can go through that in a little bit, but for now they're both put on the management the management network by default. So we'll go ahead and deploy this third OVA. This is a VMware specific task that can be used for any kind of virtual machine. We are going to select the OVA package template, which, as you can see, is CVP 2019.1.4, which we downloaded from arista.com. And then we have to name it. In this instance, it is the third. It'll be the tertiary in the multi-node installation. So it's going to be, the first two are 4 and 5, so this one will be 6. That is just the name given to these particular 3. A couple of things about that before we go ahead. Actually, we will go ahead and deploy it and then talk about the prerequisites that are needed for a successful multi-node installation. So there are system prerequisites. Each of the 3 nodes, virtual machine nodes, needs to be registered with an active DNS server. We need an active NTP server. And if we're going to do zero-touch provisioning, we need to be able to enable DHCP, which is not part of this video. As I was saying before, we have latency requirements from CVP to CVP. It's 10 milliseconds, 5 milliseconds or less recommended, and we usually put these on the same management network. CVP to devices is 500 milliseconds, and then for the threshold for warning messages is over 5 seconds or 10 seconds, and that you'll see in actually the CloudVision UI. As you could see before, we showed the example for the recommended deployment on the other cluster. I will go ahead and get this started and then flip back over there. Yeah. So we'll go back to this one, which is an example of a normal production deployment. The first one is known as the primary, the second one is known as the secondary, and the third one is the tertiary. And that becomes significant as we get into the installation procedure. So this will take a few minutes actually to deploy, and we will speed this up. So in the meantime, in order to start the shell-based installation, you at the login prompt, you would type CVP admin. So that is not actually a login until you get to the UI, but it prompts you immediately to create a password for root, which you will use later to SSH into each of the devices, each of the nodes. So we will set this up, and we'll do that for the other one. Okay, so they're actually at the shell-based installation prompt, and we're still waiting on this one. A little bit about the OVAs that we just deployed. As we know, this OVA is the CVP virtual appliance, which is packaged and consists of the base OS packages, which is actually CentOS, the Hadoop and HBase, Apache Tomcat, Java JDK, and the CVP Portal web application that goes over top of that. Okay, it looks like it's going to let me power it on. So we'll go ahead and do that. And once we do that, we will console to it. And put it in its order. And another thing about this as well is that these particular VMs for this installation have been deployed in thick disk mode. So if we look at the host, we can see that the amount of space allocated is 1 terabyte. And there's 1 terabyte provisioned and used, which means everything that you provisioned actually gets used at the time. For lab environments, on another note, you can do thin disk mode, where it will provision the space, but it won't actually use that until it's needed. So it's a little bit more flexible for lab environments. For this installation, though, we're going to do, we've done thick disk, and we won't be utilizing these very long. We'll actually delete them and probably just, for a lab environment, do the single node installation. So on that note, we will go ahead and start. This is our primary node. So we hit primary. Oh, my mistake. We actually hit M for a multi-node installation, and then we designate this as the primary. So for all 3 of the nodes, we will go ahead and start entering in the network management based prereq data information that we had discussed previously. So we'll go ahead and put in our DNS, our NTP, telemetry ingest key. This is actually a key variable that is used to encrypt the data going back and forth between our devices and CloudVision, specifically for telemetry data that is being streamed from devices to the CloudVision nodes. So we'll just make that something standard. That can be anything you choose. We are not enabling Wi-Fi at this point. Our cluster interface name would be Ethernet 0. Our device interface name, it's going to be the same. So the explanation for this, you have the option to make it either Ethernet 0 or Ethernet 1 if you'd like to divide up the networks on which the management UI is accessed, and also the network that the devices actually reside on. So some customers prefer to do it to split those up. For our purposes, we're going to keep them both on one interface. Here you have to enter in the fully qualified domain name, which for this particular one, we've named it ps-cvp4. Let's type it correctly. Default route 10.92.64. That's for this particular network. Number of static routes will be 0 since we only have 1 connection out. TAC server IP address, we can enable that later, so we just hit enter. IP address of Ethernet 0, that is the primary address of this primary node. We have that pre-allocated from our lab. Go ahead and put our mask in. Okay, so what we're going to do here is we're going to do a verify, which actually verifies the network settings. Okay, what it did was it actually went through and brought up the network and tested the NTP connectivity and also DNS and let us know that this is a valid configuration per the management network that it is sitting on. So what we do is we can hit save, and then we will go to the other ones and set them up. And this There's ways you can speed through this, but I always prefer, especially in a production customer environment, to be very conservative about the way we do this. So another multi-node, this is the secondary. And while that's verifying, what we can do is go back to the primary and go ahead and start the configuration process by hitting apply. So I won't hit apply on the others until this one indicates that it's waiting for the information from the secondary and the tertiary. As you can see, once you hit apply, it actually goes through and does the check again. But it's better to do the verify first instead of starting the installation where there's a problem. So it re-verified that it is a valid config. Okay, waiting for other nodes to send their hostname and IP. So in order to do that, we hit apply on the secondary, and it's going to prompt us for the primary's password. And then we are going to do the same thing on the tertiary, and it is going to ask for the primary's password. And then from this point on, we wait. These start up their network services, and the primary will actually indicate when it starts communication with the secondary and the tertiary. It is starting up the NTPD service, and it's pushing its hostname, IP address, and public key to the primary node. This is the information that's stored in the YAML file that's created. So it's already receiving the public keys to the private node. Files have been transferred. And then what happens is they each send their individual their individual YAMLs to the primary, and it puts them together into one single. Okay, the primary is working. Okay, it has communication with the secondary node at this point. Okay, this is a successful indication where both the secondary and the tertiary nodes have gone ahead and completed their installations. And you can literally just quit out of these if you like, but it's nice just to have them open while the primary is completing. So this is actually one of the most time-consuming parts to where all of the CloudVision based application software has been installed properly. The network portions have been synced up between the primary, secondary, and tertiary, and then it goes ahead and starts all of the components that are contained for CloudVision that are running over top of the CentOS node. Okay, as we can see, this has completed. It indicates that the CVP installation was successful. You can also see that nothing is indicated on the others. We can just quit these. And as you can see, if we were to type CVP admin again, it would go back into the installation mode where we could edit configurations and that sort of thing. But since the installation is very complete complete, there's not much we could really edit here. So just quit that. But since we set a root password, we can go into each of the nodes as root if we want to. We can also SSH to these devices as well, which we will do. So we will go ahead and quit this, and this means that our UI is also fully operational as well. So we're going to go into the UI, but first we will go into we'll SSH to the primary itself. Okay. 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 There are some things that we can take a look at here that now that we're on the CLI of the primary. So we can literally just close these out. And as you can see, we have 3 nodes the VMs that we had deployed. So what we're going to do is take a look at the CLI here. And there's commands that they're show type commands, but they're with CVP, they're CVPI is the prefix for all the commands. So we can take a look at a couple things here. In order to execute CVPI commands, you have to be CVP user, so it automatically goes into that with no password prompt. And we can do in order to check the components that are installed and active and running, we can type CVPI-V = 3 for verbose and do a status and all. So we'll do that and take a look and make sure that all of the components on all 3 devices are up and running. Okay, so if we scroll back, we can see that it checks on the secondary and the tertiary for all of these components. If you want a full list of the commands that you can run with CVPI, you just type CVPI and enter, and it gives you that list. So you can do your backup, you can do a manual backup, even though there are automatic backups done 2 o'clock in the morning, and they keep the most recent 5. You can also enable specific components, you can disable specific components, you can do a start all. You can look at your environment, and it gives you some good information, such as the version you're on, in case you have forgotten your ingest key. It's indicated here, and then the network information for all 3. So we will go ahead and go into the UI now. You can actually connect to any one of the 3 and get the same functionality, but most people just go to the primary, and the default login for the UI itself, it has nothing to do with the password that we set during the installation process. And the default password is CVP admin. And so we'll go ahead and change that. Put an appropriate email address. And that's it. So you can do a few things from this point, but you just finish, and then it logs you out, and then you have to enter in the new password. Okay, so this is the default view of CVP. If you had devices that were already streaming telemetry, most likely you're not going to at this stage, but they would show up in this list, and that is actually a subject for another session. But as far as provisioning goes, you are at the very base point at where you can start building configurates, and then there's the whole process with creating containers and applying configurates to the different containers, whether it is a hierarchical container-based configurate or a device-specific configurate. So that should be about it. There is a settings page where you can go in and take a look at a bunch of different things. You can set up TACACS here, but we will go ahead and end this session because the installation is done. You can actually see that we've installed version 2019.1.4, and that is all.